Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abigail Chong, and I'm a fourth-year English Literature major from the School of Humanities. It is my pleasure to be here with you this morning. Before we begin the lecture by European Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation, Mr. Carlos Moedas, may I invite the chair of today's lecture, NTU President, Professor Subra Suresh. Let us put our hands together to welcome Professor Suresh.
Thank you, Abigail. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor to invite Carlos Moedas, European Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation, and a good friend to this campus. This is his first visit to Singapore and to NTU, but I've had the personal pleasure and privilege of knowing him. We're also fortunate to have Dr. Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, who's president of the European Research Council, also a good friend for many years, for joining us along with their colleagues. We're also fortunate to have the ambassador for the European Union in Singapore and several other distinguished colleagues from the embassies and excellencies from local high commissions and embassies who are joining us. Thank you all for coming. As you know, NTU on the intellectual side has put a lot of emphasis, mainly through the efforts of faculty and students, in creating programs, educational opportunities, research through both basic discovery and translational work in looking at the cutting-edge technologies that will change the course of global society in the coming decades. There are many aspects of this. There are many, many technologies, but some entities would classify most of them into a category called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. But in addition to the Fourth Industrial Revolution and beyond industrial revolutions themselves, there are technologies that are having unprecedented impact on human society. Most of this, hopefully, would be for the benefit of humanity. And like any technology in any previous industrial revolution, some of these could have detrimental effects because of either intentional or unintentional uses and abuses, as well as unintended consequences. So it's very important that we look at it with a clear perspective. Artificial intelligence, and to that some people add other aspects, which could include machine learning, robotics, and technologies that gather massive amounts of data and learn from one another so that machines themselves can make decisions using massive amounts of data that humans cannot possibly comprehend or process in the same amount of time. So that technology is maturing at a really fast rate. So the focus of today's lecture is to look at new voices and political choices in the age of artificial intelligence. There are, from NTU's perspective, we've also established earlier this year the NTU Institute of Science and Technology for Humanity to address both the positive aspects, but also policy, ethical issues, regulations, guidelines, the do's and don'ts, which are still unclear because the pace of advance of technology is far ahead of the ability of societies to comprehend it, or the abilities of governments around the world to put in place regulations and mechanisms that can address it. As a result of this, the time is ripe, and we are very delighted to have Carlos Moedas Commissioner Moedas giving us a distinguished lecture as part of NISTH, because this is very much, the title of his presentation is very much aligned with the theme and the vision of creating NISTH at NTU. I want to give a very brief introduction, even though he doesn't require much introduction. He is currently a commissioner in charge of research, science, and innovation at the European Commission, where he has been in his current role since 2014. Prior to that, Mr. Moedas was elected to the Portugal's national parliament and worked from 2011 to 2014 as Secretary of State in the Prime Minister's office in Portugal, in charge of Portuguese Adjustment Program. He worked also as a senior economic advisor of the Portuguese Social Democratic Party. He has also founded companies. He founded a company called Crimson Investment Management in 2004. He has held several key positions in the corporate sector, including in the areas of mergers and acquisitions at the investment bank Goldman Sachs in London. Mr. Moedas is a native of Portugal. He graduated with his first degree in civil engineering from the Higher Technical Institute, and then he went on where he also spent some time at École Nationale des Ponts et Chaussées, bridges and structures in Paris. Commissioner Moedas also holds an MBA from Harvard, from the Harvard Business School. So it's a great pleasure to invite Commissioner Moedas to give his lecture. Carlos.
Good morning, and thank you very much. It's great to see so many faces and so many young faces. But first of all, President Subra Suresh, thank you very much for your introduction and for your friendship. The ambassador of the European Union and the ambassadors of member states, including Portugal, here present, and all of you, thank you so much for coming here. I imagine that a lot of you look at Europe from something that is very far, and so I want to come to you and tell you a little bit what we think and what we look into this subject of artificial intelligence. But I'm very happy to be with President Subra Suresh again. I think it's the second time that he invites me. The first time was in his previous role, and you know, Subra, if I can be this familiar, thank you. And I wanted to publicly tell you, thank you for your friendship with the European Union. I mean, you have been always there for us. And so one of the reasons that I'm here is to thank you personally for that. We also have here the president of the European Research Council, Professor Bourguignon, distinguished mathematician. And so let me tell you my first feeling. I mean, yesterday came very late, and you come to Singapore and you feel the energy, right? You feel the energy in the street. You feel something different. You feel the diversity, different types of people, and somehow, even being very far, I feel at home, and that's a good feeling. But if I look at Singapore from my perspective, and first as a student, I look at the rise of these lion of Asia that you are. And I think about what's going on in the world, and why are people so afraid in the West, you know? And you know that globalization was something that was so important, that took so many people out of poverty. But then if you go and you talk about globalization in the West, meaning in Europe and the US, people are afraid. And the other day I was looking at a very interesting chart of McKinsey, where you would see the average weight of production, of productivity, but especially of economic power in the world. And you go to the first century, and you see that on the first century, the power of the economy in the world was in this part of the world. And then if you take that weighted average economic power as a geographical point, you see that that point goes on and on to the West until 1950. And then when you get to 1950, gets closer to the US, and then comes back again to the East. And you see that the speeding up of that economic power coming to your side of the world, where it belonged for so long, from 2001 to 2010, was just huge. And that's what people in other parts of the world feel somehow afraid. Feel afraid that they're losing power. Feel afraid that, you know, I always tell that in the European Union, the former Prime Minister of Italy, who used to say, there's two types of countries. There's the small ones and the ones that don't know they're small yet. And when you look at Germany, I mean, Germany is 1% of the population of the world. You know, so if we don't stick together, we are absolutely nothing. And today you see people that want to go back to the old paradigms of the sovereignty of the states, and that we should be closed, and that we should defend our borders physically. But the world is not anymore physical, it's digital. So the whole idea of sovereignty as something physical doesn't make that much sense anymore. And so what I see here in Singapore and NTU is exactly that you are grasping that opportunity, the opportunity of doing and creating this merger in between the physical and the digital world. But today what I really wanted to cover in this lecture is about the things that we have to do together. What do we have to do together in between your side of the world and our side of the world? Because people are afraid, and they're not just afraid of globalization. They know that something else is coming, and that something else is artificial intelligence. So what I think that we have to really look into is, why are we so pessimist? And that is not just in my side of the world, it's also in your side of the world. Pessimism is what really artificial intelligence is triggering. You know, not in this room, of course, but all over the world. And so it seemed really somehow strange, because in this room we are all lovers of technology. We love technology. We don't need to be convinced about it, but there are those people that will always be pessimistic about it. And you know, when you talk in the political world, you see that the populists and the nationalists and the ones that want to close the world, they are fighting back through technology. They don't believe in technology, and they think that technology will be bad for the world. And I think that the only way to do it is for you also to get somehow involved in politics, you know, because you either resist it and you'll be left out of the discussion, or you take part of the discussion. You take part in the choices that we have to make for the future of technology. So my quest for today is, how can we fight back that pessimism? You know, I recently looked at 3 covers of a German magazine, very well known, called Der Spiegel. And one of the covers of the magazine in 1964, then I saw another cover from 1978, and another one from 2016. And all the 3 had the same title. The title was, "Computers and Robots Will Lead to Mass Unemployment." Those covers are 50 years apart. And people still think that they can resist the future, they can stop the future. I don't know if you had these here, but I think it was 7 months or 8 months ago, we had this news all over Europe saying that, I think it was in Facebook, there was 2 computers that suddenly created a language that between themselves, and they started talking to each other, and the coders had to go and unplug the computers. It was totally fake news, but people believed it. You know, and before coming here, I was looking into Google, I did a search about it, and 9 out of the 10 results are that it's true. So I couldn't even find news saying that is totally false. It's impossible. What is that? Like 2 computers now create a language and you have to unplug the computers? Well, what's that? But that's what people are afraid. So I think that we have 2 things to do, and that would be my message for discussion today, is we have to look into technology in a different way, and then we have to do political choices for the future. So let's first look into the way that we look at technology. And instead of looking at the way we look into technology today, let's think about the past, the way we look at technology in the past, the way that we look into ourselves as human beings, and then how we look into the future. And finally, what are the political choices that we have? Is this just technology? Is artificial intelligence just about technology or not? But let's look into the past. I think that if you look into the past and you think, what's the role of technology, and is it that technology will always destroy jobs? You know, and I was reading about Gary Kasparov that once said, waxing nostalgic about jobs lost to technology is a little bit better than complaining that antibiotics put too many grave diggers out of work. And I think that this is so true. I mean, the transfer of labor from humans to our inventions is nothing less than a history of civilization. And I think that's the way to look at it. You know, of course technology is destroying jobs, but technology is creating a lot of new jobs. The other day I was looking at an interesting video on YouTube about Formula One. I don't know the ones here that really like to see Formula One. And you see in the 1950s how you change the wheels, right, on the pit stop. And you had 4 guys. And it took like for ages to take the wheels, put the wheels, and no, the car would go. Today, with technology, it takes seconds, but you have 22 people around the car. So does technology really destroy jobs all the time? No, technology also creates jobs. They are different. Jobs that have different skills. And I think that new technologies will demand an effort from your side to explain to people that you can create new jobs. And that's an effort that also scientists and researchers have to do. The second thing that for me is always very strange, today I was visiting the robotics center, is that we somehow have to look at us as humans, right? And I find so strange that we are convinced as humans that we will become obsolete. And for me, you try to think about it and think about what makes you really human, right? And I always go back to philosophy and to Polanyi. And Polanyi, in the 50s, he used to say that we know more than we can tell. And he divided knowledge in terms of the knowledge that you can digitize from zeros to ones, and the knowledge that is tacit. My question for you is that why are you here today listening to me if you could be in your dorm room watching me through Skype or streaming? Because the experience that you get from being here is very different from the ones that are on the streaming. It's because there's something that we cannot digitize. You know, when I think about the future of universities, and people think, but one day you don't need a campus. Of course you need. Because you need to be together. And if you're not together, there's a lot of things that you don't learn because you cannot digitize this tacit experiential knowledge. That's something that you just learn by being with people. And somehow that's what defines us as humans. You know, what defines us as humans is that we really have things that we cannot translate even in language. So artificial intelligence is not human intelligence. Artificial intelligence is something very different. And I think that it's very sad that the human being thinks that we can replace ourselves and our intelligence that is not artificial by definition. And the third is that, and this is for you specifically as students of technology, that we have always to look beyond technology. And I think that we tend to think sometimes where we are engineers, and I'm one of yours, not very good because I became a politician, but I used to be, that you know that it's all about technology. And you know, I remember when I was a student, I love economic and technological history, and looking, for instance, in the century before, basically at the beginning of the 20th century, with the electrification of the factories. When we moved from a steam engine to an electrical motor, what happened? First, most of the people in the factories didn't want an electrical motor. And then, the ones that tried it, they thought, okay, I have a big steam engine with a linear way of working, and I'm going to change that linear system by a big electrical motor. And what happened? Yeah, there were gains, but the gains were not sufficient to convince the incumbents to change. The ones that saw beyond technology were the ones that were the winners. The ones that understood that was not about just the technology, but was about the design of the factory. Because if you had electrical motors, you didn't need to have just one big electrical motor. You can have small ones, and so you don't need to design in a linear way. You can have a totally different factory. And that was what made the difference. That what was made the difference from the ones that won and the ones that lost. That was that. It was not the electrical motor per se. Was the way we looked into we could design the factories. So I think that we really have to have that approach. And I see that a lot of the engineering schools, we still look at just the technology and not at what was beyond and what is beyond the technology. And so I wanted to give you that as one of these three ways that I think we should look at technology that also will help people to understand better technology. And finally, I wanted to tell you that whatever I've said before, if you don't see technology also as a political choice, you get it wrong. So look beyond technology, look into the past, but the major choices that we have ahead of us, they are not technological, right? They are not technological. And that's why I'm very happy with being here at the Institute for Humanity. And you know, the president of France, President Macron, he launched all this idea of AI for humanity, right? And I think it's so inspiring. I think that today we have in Europe very good leaders, but I think that President Macron also goes beyond the idea that politics is just about politics. Macron understood that politics is also about technology and the way you look at technology and how you're going to use technology in the future. So the first thing is that we have to decide what direction do we want for AI. What is the direction that you want for AI? Is it just to replace human beings? Or is it to augment human beings? I want artificial intelligence to make me better, more human. And strangely enough, I think that the more you go into artificial intelligence, the more human you will become. Because then it's like electricity, right? If you have artificial intelligence all over, artificial intelligence becomes a commodity. What's not a commodity is social sciences, because those you cannot digitize. And I think that the first thing is about that direction, and that's a political choice. You know, some parts of the world can decide that AI is to replace human beings. That's a political decision. I want AI to be complementary to humans, not to replace humans. You know, fantastic specialists from AI that used to work, I think with you, Manuela Veloso, right? She used to say that in 5 years, if I go to the doctor, I want my doctor to have artificial intelligence, but I don't want my doctor to be artificial intelligence. And I think that this is the idea. You know, I want my doctor, I want my engineers to have and be helped by artificial intelligence, but I don't want them to be the artificial intelligence. It's very interesting to see what's happening in Germany today with the experience of Watson in the hospitals. As you know, and Germany is very advanced for that matter, they have put the IBM Watson in some hospitals in Germany. And the experience has been very different from what people imagine. Is that Watson, when he looks at someone that has a pain chest, he goes into his artificial intelligence algorithms, and sometimes he immediately becomes with that people has a very rare disease. You know, because he goes into an algorithm that gets you what's the effect of that pain in my chest, and it goes into a solution that a doctor, because he's human, he immediately will spot, no, this person just, he came and he bumped into something, that's why he has the chest pain, so he's not sick, right? You need the doctor. And I think that this mix in between the human and the machine are a political choice, and that is the political choice that we want to have in Europe. The second political choice, which is a very important one for democracy, is about data. And that's something I wanted also to discuss with you, is that how do you deal in this world of data? You know, you can have the best artificial intelligence in the world, but if you don't have good data, you know, it doesn't really get you anywhere. Cédric Villani, in his report to the French president, refers to that. He says somewhere that data is the raw material for artificial intelligence, but even more important than that, you have to get data that is not biased. So data, he says, is more important than algorithms. And I think that somehow we could imagine, and I put this for you to discuss here, is should we think about some kind of Hippocratic oath like the doctors do when they finish their graduate programs for data or artificial intelligence? Should we think about something that we respect the values, that data is something that we have to respect and be sure that is not biased. And I think that Europe has been a good case study for data. We were very criticized 2 years, 3 years ago when we decided to go into regulation on the protection of personal data. And people said it was a bad idea at the time, that again, Europe was trying to do something that shouldn't be done. And finally, 2 years later, you see, look, democracy is our value. So if we don't take care of protecting data, we will not get there. So how do you protect data and at the same time you open data? Because we want to be as open as we can, but at the same time we need to be sure that data is fair, is good data, that I'm not using data from just one part of the population or just male or just female. I have to have data that allow me to get to better results. So I think that when I see what you're doing here, Professor Alan, is exactly on that direction, the direction of rethinking these problems, not just as technological problems, but as political problems, as choices, as ways of looking at the future. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to finish by really saying that innovation is really something that has passionated me for a big part of my life. And when you look at the challenges of innovation, they are all there, right, in artificial intelligence. You need to have friction, you need to have change, but people don't want change. They don't want conflict. People want just to stay as they are. And artificial intelligence comes as a disruption to our lives. And so I think that somehow we have to be cautious, but we cannot be pessimistic. And I think that today in the political world, there's a danger, is that if artificial intelligence becomes ideological, as in some parts of the world climate change became ideological, then we have no future. So it's our responsibility to make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't become an ideological political discussion. Because when it gets to be ideological, then we're done. And the link here, my friends, is about exactly artificial intelligence for humanity, artificial intelligence to make us better. And for those that I loved when I was very young to read that book of Fahrenheit 451 of Red Bradbury. And he was such an amazing writer. And once I read that he was talking to another of his fellow friends and also writer, a guy called Brian Sibley. And Brian Sibley wrote him a letter saying that he was very afraid of robots, right? And that he had really, he said, look, Ray, this is going to be terrible. Robots were going to replace us, and this is going to be a disaster for humanity. And so Bradbury eventually penned a response back and said, so it's finally with the robots you say you fear. Why fear something? Why not create with it? I'm not afraid of robots. I'm afraid of people. Any machine, any robot is the sum total of the way we use it, Bradbury said. And you know, this was written in 1970. This could be written today. And that's what makes me afraid, is that people still are afraid of technology. And so Bradbury was right, but nothing changed from that time, because we haven't been able to show to people that technology creates jobs, that technology is here for humanity, that technology can get us to be better people. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Moedas, for your inspiring lecture on new voices and political choices in the age of artificial intelligence. May we now invite the Commissioner and Professor Suresh to be seated at the front of the lecture theatre for a discussion led by Professor Suresh. Professor Suresh, please.
Thank you, Carlos, for a very nice lecture. Thank you very much. Let me start with two questions, and then we can go to the audience with questions. So let me pick up on a couple of the points that you mentioned. So let's imagine a scenario. These are two hypothetical scenarios. Actually, it may not be so hypothetical in the second case. Technology always disrupts society. Every industrial revolution has done this. So the first industrial revolution destroyed tens of millions of jobs. Eventually, it created many more jobs. So just this week in Tianjin, where you were, the World Economic Forum predicted that the fourth industrial revolution, AI and robotics, will create 58 million jobs. That was their prediction. So one of the issues is not the rate of job destruction versus the rate of job creation, but it's the time lag between the rate of job destruction and job creation. So in the previous industrial revolutions, the rate of job creation lagged behind the rate of job destruction by several decades. This time, the pace is so fast and the political forces are so strong, which you beautifully articulated. The fear is that if tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people lose jobs around the world, but it takes 20 years to create even more jobs, there will be no patience among voters around the world. So how do we make sure politically, this is not a technological issue alone, how do we make sure politically that the time lag between job disruption and eventual benefit is not too large? I think this is one of the issues. Let me just go to a second point. Maybe you can address them. The second point, you talked about biases in data. Some are intentional biases, some could be unintentional biases. So I had a president of a university from South Africa visit here at NTU a couple of weeks ago. And he was pointing out that when they use face recognition programs that are commercially available today, the error rate for African face recognition is much, much greater than the error rate for recognizing faces of Caucasians, because most of the data that was used to do face recognition is based on Western data. So imagine yourself as an African national traveling to a predominantly Caucasian country. At the airport, you are recognized based on face recognition. There could be unintended, significant bias for that individual. So again, how do we make sure that when we start to implement data, we don't unintentionally create biases, and the role of politics and policies is quite profound. So those are 2 points that I want to add to your comments.
Thank you, Subra. I think that on the two issues that are very important for the political world, and the problem is that today the political world doesn't really understand technology. So like most of the politicians were not trained on technology. They were not trained to understand technology. And so they have a great deal of really a problem of understanding. And that understanding is what's not creating the right policies for these adaptation that Subra was referring to. So if we have that lag in between the time that we are going to create these new jobs, it's because I think the right educational measures from primary school were not taken. Because we can have policies that reduce that lag. I don't know if it's going to solve the problem, but if I have a different system, then I can have a better result. And today the lag is created because people were not prepared for the digital world. And the educational system in most countries in Europe doesn't change at least for 50 or 60 years. I see that my children, we have these great conversations, and my children at school still learn exactly the same thing that I learned 20 or 30 years ago. And so that change of the educational system, for me, is the basis of everything that we are talking. And what are we talking about in terms of that change? We're talking about changing very simple things. I mean, we still have so many people that are trained in schools to just learn things by heart, to know about facts. And those things are important, don't get me wrong, you have to be good at that. But today the world is very different from the past, so you also have to be good at navigating in between the intersections of disciplines. How many secondary schools are doing that? In Europe, I know Finland as a case where they're now trying to get more people, not just in the secondary school looking at disciplines, but being in the intersection of the different disciplines, to prepare them for a world where, you know, before you would prepare people for a profession, right? My parents would say, you're going to be an engineer, a civil engineer, so you're going to build houses. Or you'd be a lawyer and you're going to be in the courtroom. And then, I mean, when I finished my MBA, I always tell this story. In 1999, I got an offer to go, at the time, to work for Google. And I thought, 1999, I thought, what? Working in a company that like looks at web pages? I mean, I better go to Goldman Sachs. I mean, it's like, that's a profession, right? And, you know, because all that, so the professions that the World Economic Forum had these statistics, I mean, it's not that statistics, they are what they are, but that said that 65% of the kids that go today into primary school, they will work in professions that do not exist yet. So the question is that how do you have an educational system at the primary level and secondary level that prepares them for that, for professions that do not exist yet. And you know one thing is that sometimes you can have a great degree. You go to the best school, but if you're 5 years after graduation are not in a very good place where you keep learning, you're dead, because you haven't really learned and your curve goes down and you came out of a good university, but those 5 years of the first job are essential. So if you don't have a job, you're destroying human capital, because 5 years you have no self-confidence, you think you're not worth anything because you don't have a job. And so how do you prepare? So that will be my first point on the lag, that we can never reduce probably as we wish, but with the educational reforms at the primary and the secondary level, we should reduce a little bit. And then on data, I think that I would also be interested by the opinions of in the people here that have been aware of what we did in Europe in terms of the GDPR, so the protection of data regulation that has been one of the major topics in Europe of discussion. And exactly, I think that when I look at data, and I'm not sure, look, this is the first time we're doing it, so this is a law that has to be changed eventually in the future, because we don't know yet what that future will be. But one thing is sure, I have to be the owner of my data, right? And I have to be the one that owns my data. And if I want to give data to a university to do research, I should be free to do it. But if a company is using my data for commercial purposes, I should be able to monetize that. It's my data. And so I think that the principle for me in terms of the data has to be around those points. And then there's a role of the government. And the role of the government is to try to avoid these biases that are there naturally. And this is something that we don't have a solution yet. But if governments don't take the steps, the necessary steps to make the algorithms more transparent. So I'm not saying that we can solve the problem, but if I can know what's in the algorithm, then I can understand. So if I know that my database is just of white people from Italy, male, then I know what the result is. But today, no, it's a black box. And so the first thing is like transparency. Transparency of the algorithms, transparency of what is in there that will get us to the results. And that is another point to the political world, because people, they are afraid because this looks all like a black box. You don't know what's inside. So everything that we're trying to do is about that transparency that you are referring to.
Thank you. We will invite a few questions. Yes, please. We'll start here. Could you just give your name and...
Hi, hello, morning, Mr. Carlos. My name is Henry. Okay, my question is that I think when we talked about globalization, right, I think we are talking about two things at once. The first one, which is economic globalization, which means free trade, comparative advantage, win-win trade. This type of globalization, the countries will not lose their sovereignties. And this type one, I think they would welcome technology, for example. But there's a second element when we talk about globalization, which sing to the tunes of political globalization, one continent government, one world government, centralized surveillance, centralized data, and this type of globalization, number two, which I think will destroy sovereignty. So do you think that realistically speaking, politically speaking, we can have economic globalization without political globalization? Thank you.
That is such an interesting question that have been in my mind for these 5 years that I've been in this job, is that globalization is, for me, just type one. So there was an economic globalization of the value chains. And so the world became global economically. But strangely enough, technology is going the other way around in terms of the political world. So the political world is becoming tribal because of technology. And politics is becoming more local, not more global. And so you have this connection in between an economy that is globalized and the political world that is more and more local. And that's the tension that we are living, is exactly that. So the question for you as technologists is, how can we change that through technology? So how can you have technology helping democracies and not going the other way around? Because today technology is getting people to be very tribal. So if I think one way, I will find people all over the world that think exactly the way I think, and that's my tribe. And then you think other way and you have your tribe. But then, I mean, that's not what I want. I want diversity. I want people thinking differently and working together. And so I would challenge you as technologists to think, one, how can I use blockchain to reduce inequality? And then I'm serving politics through technology. And technologies like blockchain have such an amazing potential to help us in the future to get more people into the economic world that today are not there, and to reduce somehow inequality, because with blockchain I can get rid of intermediaries, and so instead of having these economic intermediaries, I can have more people that today are not in the economic world to be part of it. You can use artificial intelligence, but you have to use technology in the political world in a way that you're not killing what we call the national sovereignties, but to help to reinforce the national sovereignty. The European Union is a great example of that, because people in the European Union decided that they were available to reduce a little bit of their national sovereignty to have more sovereignty. Because we all gave up a little bit of sovereignty, so we don't have a currency in each country. We have a coastal guard that is European today. We have Schengen, where we can travel around Europe. But we are more sovereign, because alone you cannot keep your sovereignty in a digital world. So I think that you have ways of using technology to somehow reinforce technology, to reduce inequality, and to get the world to have a better governance in terms of politics, but not to use that as to control the whole world or control how people move or what they say. That's not my vision of technology. I think that's a bad use of technology, by the way, and it's a waste. I think that's not my way of seeing things, but you can use technology to help the political world to be more connected with the global economy. And today we have this disconnect that is killing us. And you see that politicians, what they do is that to say, look, be afraid of that, because I can get you back to the old times. Let's go back to the old times, but you cannot go back to the old times, the old times anyway. So.
Is it okay if I ask a question? Okay. Hi, Mr. Moedas. Well, thanks for speaking to us. My name is Elvin. I'm a student of NTU. So early on, you mentioned something about transparency. So the question I have for you is has a little bit of social and political aspect to it. So do you think that governments or people in power can have a monopoly on AI? And there are a few leaders of tech giants who think that the solution to automation is universal basic income. So can I have your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Very good. So on basic income first, I don't think that basic income is a solution, because you don't have a job just because of the money. You want a job because job gives you purpose. A job gives you a sense to your life. And so if you just replace people's dignity for a basic income, they can survive, but they'll be very unhappy. And so I think that when I say that I want to have technology creating jobs, is because jobs is more than money. So I don't think that basic income is the solution, because they have tried it. I mean, actually in Finland, they have done some, tried that, and you feel that as a human being, you don't want that at the end of the day. You know, your generation, and you're young, your generation is a generation that doesn't want just a job. You want to change something in the world, right? And for that is not the fact that you have the money. So I think that we probably should do a better job with technology. And I would like just to go to blockchain again, that as politicians we have had for 100 years in capitalism, we said, okay, we have production, and then we have wealth, and then we have to redistribute that through taxes. So I put taxes, so I get from people that have a little bit more to give to people that have less. But with blockchain, somehow you could imagine a world where you can redistribute before it happens. So you can avoid inequality in the first place by distributing wealth in a different way. So you could imagine a world that through blockchain you could say what goes to the workers, what goes to the capital, and what goes to society. And that you can do that prior to taxing people. So I think that the paradigm is changing so fast that politicians, I think that they can solve by taxing people more and more. They're not thinking about how this is going to work in the future. I think you have to use technologies to distribute wealth before you create inequality. So here is an idea for you technologists to look at blockchain as a way of tackling those problems of inequality. But so to your point, I've had my doubts, so I'm humble about it, about the basic income. But I think that the problem is bigger than that, we have to find. And you know, you have so many problems in the world that until you have problems, you have jobs. Someone said this before me. But we have to find ways of getting people to be solving problems. That's what people were born to do, not to be just like receiving a basic income.
Hello, Mr. Moedas. My name is Patricia. I'm from Germany. I was wondering, where exactly do you see the role of universities on the matter of artificial intelligence? Should it be more on research or also on teaching, maybe even the ethical part behind artificial intelligence? And does the European Union offer some sort of platform for cooperation between universities in this matter? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that, as I said before, I think that the ethical part and this idea that you had here at the university to look at technology for humanity, technology for the good, technology for the people, I think that is the future. That is the future. So first of all, the role of universities as thinking beyond technology and beyond artificial intelligence about the role of artificial intelligence for humans. And that is fantastic to see. I think there's very few initiatives still around the world of this size. And so I think that congratulations for that. I would like to see more of that in Europe. And then I think that it's a little bit like when we started in the digital world, right? People would say the digital economy, or we're going to put some courses about digital. And I think that is the other way around. I think artificial intelligence and digital have to be part of every course. So you can have an history or a sociology course. You have to introduce artificial intelligence there. You have to have digital in there. So it's not about having just people preparing themselves as a discipline, but how do you incorporate that in the university all over? I always, when I visited you last time, I still tell that story about interdisciplinarity, that people would go to Carnegie Mellon and they would just be able to choose what they wanted to do, right? If they liked music and physics, they could just tailor-made their courses and tailor-made their degree. And I think that somehow I see that vision that I've discussed with Subra before of incorporating in universities that flexibility that people can go and do what they're passionate about, and how do you include that in curriculum. And so that's one thing that I've been trying to convince European universities based on your experience there in the US.
Great. Thank you very much. I think the Commissioner has a lunch appointment in town before too long, and we don't. One of the evils of technology is traffic and congestion, unintended or maybe intended consequence. So to give him enough time so that he's not late for lunch, let me take this opportunity to thank the Commissioner for a very inspiring lecture, and let's thank him. And I just wanted to mention that one of the initial activities of NISTH, the NTU Institute of Science and Technology for Humanity, will be a summit that focuses on ethics and artificial intelligence. It'll be coming up before too long, and Professor Alan Chan has been working hard in planning for it. You'll hear about it before too long. And so we'll continue the conversation that started this morning in a more formal way before too long. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Commissioner Carlos Moedas and Professor Subra Suresh. We have now come to the end of the distinguished lecture by Commissioner Carlos Moedas. We hope that you have enjoyed the lecture, and we believe that today is but the start of many conversations on the impact of science and technology on our daily lives.